You know that end of day feeling when your brain's toast and you still have a mountain of notes to finish? Yeah, not anymore. Athelis AI Scribe is the ultimate clinic weapon. It listens in your real time during patient visits and automatically writes your notes. That means less time at the computer and way more time for your actual life. Whether that's seeing more patients, grabbing lunch on time, or just getting home before dark. No typing and no more late night charting. It's a dream. Seriously, this is the scribe you've been waiting for. Go check out a live demo at athelis.com and see how much time you can get back. That's ATHELAS.com.
That's what it was. And that's what it continues to be. This year will be a little bit different because we're asking different questions, but that's what it continues to be. So it was the first, and to my understanding, one of two, I think, open source data pool sets. I think I'm the only one that runs it in the kind of a high statistical analysis type environment, but all to say, it is a open source data pool. It primarily focuses in rehab therapy, so PT, OT, speech, PTA, OTA, SLPAs, but we have recreational therapists, nurses, pharmacists, PAs. They all drop their information in there.
Back in 2014, this guy cracked open a bourbon, flipped on a mic, and joined one of the very first episodes of this podcast. At the time, Twitter was thriving. TikTok didn't exist, and physical therapists were still arguing over whether they should market themselves or not. Fast forward nearly a decade later, the profession has evolved for the most part. The conversations have gotten deeper, and that guest, he's done just about everything. From CFO to COO, professor to consultant, marketer to educator. He's been in the trenches and in the boardrooms. He's helped reshape how PTs think about their careers, their businesses, and their value. And through it all, he's stayed curious, creative, and still just as comfortable sipping bourbon and talking shop. Now, he's also a classically trained pianist, but that's a story for later. Let's raise a glass and welcome back one of our original guests back 9.5 years ago. To the PT Pintcast, here's Ben Fung. I was thinking about making the next year's theme be a decade under the influence. A nice little play on the fact that the podcast
decade under the influence. I like that a lot.
Well, thanks for saying yes 10 years ago.
Yeah, dude, I can't even believe it. It's crazy.
To a PT student who was like, "Hi, I have a podcast. I'm not sure if you know what that is because it's weird. It's new. Will you be on it?" And then you and a handful of others were like, "Sure, say less."
Yeah, no, I remember that, the inaugural 6-pack. I actually remember that recording very vividly.
Really?
Yeah, very vividly. And I remember I was just starting UpDoc, and I didn't have a good straight answer for you for your question of what does a day in the life look like for me. And I was like, it was weird because it was startup and there was no schedule. It was there's days where I was basically twiddling my thumbs going, oh, I hope we make money, and there are other days where I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to contain myself today because there's just too much work to do. So
right, feast or famine. Well, it's hard. So I mentioned, when I reached out, just for the audience context, Ben was one of the inaugural 6-pack. I did a 6-pack of episodes to release. It wasn't planned to go much further than that. I wasn't thinking well, here's the first 6-pack. Let's see where this thing goes. I was sort of doing 6 and I was going to put it out into the world and then just sort of that was it. Thanks everybody. Good night.
Right. Mission accomplished.
Right. And I think we saw a little momentum, and I don't think it was necessarily because of what I did or any of the guests said that was magic. I think there was a profession that had so many questions and podcasting hadn't really reached its peak yet. I mean, right now at this point, I feel like more people have a podcast than don't have a podcast.
Right.
Listeners. I think it was there wasn't a great way to go deeper, long. It wasn't there was no such thing as long form content is what I'm guessing at. And podcasting was ripe for it. And then the opposite, instead of having to be Sports Center, you could go deep, an inch wide and a mile deep on something so random as PT. Mm-hmm. And now we've seen people go even more niche. I'm just doing a home health show about PT. And 15 years ago, that wasn't able to be supported. And now it is.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. So there's the context. So I reached back out to you. I was like, listen, I'm coming up on 10 years. I want to have people back on the show who were there in the beginning. And I sort of prompted you by saying like, well, let's talk about like what's changed, or what, things that change and stay the same. How do you think both you and the profession, this is a big question to start, have
Yeah.
evolved in the last 10 years?
I mean, that's such a good timed question, because right now, like if you followed me like by proxy into Jimmy's podcast here, you probably knew me from like work from UpDoc or from like salary or job market stuff. And so I'm actually releasing a year 10 pulse. Like, we're hoping to get it out this year. And actually, that's one of the major questions is on like the macro / meta is like, what actually happened these last 10 years? Like what really happened? Where are we now? And so I say, how has the profession evolved? Difficultly. Apologize for that. That was my alarm that just went off of going, I better check in to make sure Jimmy's like home safely. But yeah, I think our profession evolved with difficulty. I think that 5 years ago, if you can even believe it, was 2020. So so that's nuts. Maybe 4 on the rolling calendar year. So for half of it, between 2015 and before the embarkation of 2020, I think that our profession evolved very, very quickly. It really tried to create professional roots of excellence. I think we really tried to hammer in hyper specialization. If you look back, you looked at a lot of people that had OCSs, SCSs. They were getting residencies, fellowships. They were getting a lot of the what I call the corporate certifications, so like MDT, COMT, SFMA. Like, that was really hot back in the mid 20 teens into 2020, and then all of a sudden, poof, none of that mattered, right, at all. And then we got hit with a lot of different, call it world happenings, right? And it's like something that I probably said, I say this on every podcast, and it bugs the heck out of my wife, so I'm just going to do it again. She's pretty much the smartest person I know, and she tells me that sometimes you just don't get to control who you are in time, right? And like, you don't get to control if you were born into the greatest generation. You don't get to control if you were born into 10,000 BC or the 1930s depression, right? Like, you are where you are. These are the realities you get to deal with, and it's on us to make the most of it. And I think that when 2020 hit, we really did evolve with difficulty, because all of a sudden, what was a very brick and mortar, high human touch experience suddenly turned into a, how do we even deliver this? And so I think since then, both for economic reasons, world happenstance, as well as the embarkation of AI in just like the last 18 months or so, we are evolving with difficulty, because we're not a very, and I say this with so much love, because, I grew up in this profession, so to speak. I became a professional because I was a patient first. Such a common story in our world, right? And we like to hold to our roots. We believe very deeply in some of these like deep-seated things that evolved with our call it our North American, or maybe our USA based profession since the post-polio era. And so much of that has carried through. And I feel like with the disruption we've seen in just even the last 3 years or so, we've evolved with great amount of difficulty, because it's hard for such a large-hearted, emotion on sleeve profession to change with some of these rapid changing times. To answer your second question, how have I evolved? I've calmed down.
Okay, what does that mean?
I've calmed down a little bit. I've moved from entrepreneurial, heavy grind set type stage. I've shifted into academics. So, I'm a professor and like a CU educator now. I still do consulting work, but again, stepped away from that grind set of entrepreneurial XYZ. And some of that's also kind of toned down too. That was a very big emphasis in like the late 20 teens. It's like, like the go get it, cash
Very
PT, startup, like we're just going to make this huge thing. I don't care about days off type mindset. And that's very much the opposite of like the workplace, cultural orientation right now.
That's a big, you're reading my mind. We're going to get to that in a little bit, but I want to go deeper and double click on one of the things that you had just said. And you just listed a ton of hats that you've worn in the last 10 years: COO, CFO, professor, marketer, educator. Now I'll ask a question globally about that. What's been the most unexpected turn in your career path, and what did it teach you personally about professional growth?
So I would say it was the startup. That was not part of the roadmap. how I got here, and I forget if we talked about, like, I have such a vivid memory of like the latter half of our conversation, and I forget if we talked about how I got to this point. I'm pretty sure we did, because that was, I think, part of the whole six pack idea was like, who are these six individuals, how did they get here and whatnot. And so,
Yeah.
just for the audience, so you don't have to scroll back like 18,000 episodes, I wasn't a PT first. I was an engineer before I was a PT. And the way I got into the startup world was, I hit a couple of glass ceilings in the corporate health acute care environment, and my hospital CEO, now retired, was mentoring me and said, "Look, if you want to make an impact beyond the therapy department, so to speak, you've got to get an MBA or an MPH, or you have to be something beyond your clinical doctorate, just because in the healthcare environment, especially corporate healthcare, they don't care." Right, they don't even care if you're an MD, because you take a look at most of the corporate executive boardroom representatives,
Right.
and most of the directors, right, most of the C-suite folks, they're accountants, or they're something else. They're not clinicians. And so I went to get the MBA. That actually was also a little too early in the career path, and so it just turned out through then Twitter. Different podcasts and blogs reached out. I was blogging at the time, and kind of like the podcast space, just wasn't many PT blogs, and I was talking a
Right.
lot about just the things that nobody wanted to talk about in the therapy, primarily money, and and, um, and that's what formed then UpDoc Media, and now UpDoc Inc., along with a couple other companies that we started, and I've slowly stepped away from. But that was the biggest pivot. It was never the plan for me to go into business for myself. It was always me to, like, go back to the corporate health environment, like some kind of triumphal return,
Right.
with my
Right. Right.
MBA, and be like, ha, here I am again. Yeah, exactly, we're going to change things now at a policy level. Um and, and turns out that that didn't happen, but I did change things at a influence level.
How'd that feel? Like it's almost like Count of Monte Cristo, right? The count was like, I'm going to
Yes.
return. I'm going to show them what they missed out on.
Yeah.
And then by the
Yeah.
time you get there, you're like, I sort of don't care about proving them wrong. What I found is a way to find a place, create a place for myself that I'm even happier.
Yeah, yeah. So it's so funny that you mentioned that, because at one of the CSMs, and I feel like you and I, like, whenever I don't come to CSMs as often as I like to, but anytime that we always somehow, we
Run
always
into
like
each
hitch
other.
the same room, or the same hall patterns, and at one point I ran into my old boss's boss, right? And it was one of those, like, weird moments where that boss almost didn't recognize me, right? And I was like, yikes. And what was really interesting was just kind of looking at the crew they were with, and just kind of just gauging the environment. I was like, wow, y'all haven't changed at all, like, not a single
Wow.
bit. Like, you're still doing the same things, you're still thinking the same things, like, professionally, clinically, all of it. And I was just like, yikes, there has been zero growth here at all. Like, what was once, like you said, like, I'm gonna get back, and prove you all wrong, turned into a very almost like a pathos type situation, where I was just like, oh man, I kind of feel bad for you now. Like, all that, like, like that cathartic vindication type, professional righteous indignation just evaporated in that moment. And I was just like, wow, there's been zero at all, no change. And I think that the feeling that I can really describe was a little bit of relief that I didn't return to that environment, because I think that
Yeah.
would have sapped me dry. That to know that, and I see this a lot in my consulting work, is there's we talk about this a lot. We're going to release in the Pulse, and like, there's always this question of, like, what are the true barriers of high team performance and excellence, organizational growth, that kind of stuff, culture, etc. And we've long identified the middle management link to be a problem, not necessarily because of the middle managers that are there, but because of the structure of the organizations. But at the same time, there are certain people that are in play that have been there for years and years and years and years, right? And then I talked about this at the NARA conference. For those you don't know, it's the National Association of Rehab Agencies and Providers. And it's it's kind of private practice esque. All to say that, I was speaking on workforce engagement and organizational excellence, and I said, look, there are managers and there are managers, and some are there because they've been there forever, and that's where they do the least amount of damage, and some are there because they're a linchpin and they've been there forever, and if we lost them, the whole department would evaporate. And so all of those type of thoughts and feelings flooded through, and I just realized that, wow, no, this is good. Like, where I am is good. I didn't need to go back to that corporate environment. I didn't need to go back into that same rigmarole. and I was making plenty difference doing what I was doing, which at the time was putting out industry reports and kind of transparent information pieces that just didn't exist, and now it does, which is really, really great.
So talk about the pulse. I remember, I mean, again, I was still a student when I think you put out the first one. Was that 10?
Hmm.
Was that 8.5? Yeah.
Yeah.
And the way you would get salary information was like this. You'd roll into, I mean, I don't even know if there were Facebook groups then. You'd roll onto Twitter and you'd ask a question and be
Yeah.
like, hi, I'm in this area of the country. I'm taking this job. What should I be asking for? And then you would get a wild,
Oh yeah.
like you'd go into the comments of that and you would get just a wild amount of responses, some just not even realistic and some but you never knew. And
Yeah.
then
You
you
didn't.
were like, well, let's do the data on this. And you created sort of that thing. And so talk about what it is and what if people haven't downloaded it or consumed it, what it was and what it has become.
That's great. That's great. So what it was actually a version 2.0 of an MBA, it was like the senior year, if you will, of an MBA coursework capstone project. And we were supposed to do like a huge industry report, like a perspective and stuff like that. So it was one segment of that was like, hey, what's the actual like national footprint map work of what PTs are being paid and so forth. How it did come about is like what you said. Then Twitter, I don't think there was any Facebook groups. If it did, maybe the DPT student group just started, but it was just like airwaves, right? Of like, hey, I'm making this up, like Illinois, I'm about to take a job for $27 an hour. Is this okay? Right.
You
And
had
you would
no
get,
idea.
no one had any clue. Right. And then like I had some because I ran that report. So I had like kind of a more of a macro lens look of it, but it's also very specific by like zip code, right? Like, and you mentioned now you're a little bit more rural, right? So rural versus city versus suburban, that's different. Different states have different norms. And so what it used to be was I would send out these, I still use Google Forms just because everybody trusts it. So I sent out these Google Form surveys of like, hey, tell me what you're getting paid. It's fully anonymous. Drop all the information you could possibly drop that you're comfortable with. I will trend these and I will publish the raw data. That's what it was. And that's what it continues to be. This year will be a little bit different because we're asking different questions, but that's what it continues to be. So it was the first, and to my understanding, one of two, I think, open source data pool sets. I think I'm the only one that runs it in the kind of a high statistical analysis type environment. But all to say, it is a open source data pool. It primarily focuses in rehab therapy, so PT, OT, speech, PTA, OTA, SLPAs. But we have recreational therapists, nurses, pharmacists, PAs. They all drop their information in there. I think I had a dentist once put their information in there. I was like, wow, we're crossing the gaps. And so we trend for the per annum equivalent. Because everybody will drop in like their hourly versus their annual versus their PRN versus the travel. We threw that in there, even experience factors as specific as zip code. And so we trended all that stuff out. Year over year, we focus on slightly different pieces, but we always publish the raw data so you can search for information like, okay, where's the zip code of 92109 and how do PTs get paid there or PTAs or so forth. But then we also give like deep impressions as an e-periodical, so you can just read it. And so it's read by candidates and hiring managers alike. And you can search for yourself, like what is the actual norm? And we throw the outliers out there, the experience factors, if specialty even helps. And spoiler alert, kind of none of it does. What helps the most, it seems to be, is tenure. So the longer you're at a place, it seems to get you paid the most. The first year, it was like the most striking because we had this, it was like the open section comment of, what else you need to know. And it was, you could tell, right? It's like back in like the AOL, AIM messenger days, you could tell when somebody's like really haughty about their words and you're just kind of typing it in a certain way. And this guy was like, or gal, I have no idea who this person was, but it was like, I'm a senior therapist with 15 years of experience. And they were getting paid something like $78,000 a year. And there was like a new grad, like around the corner getting paid like 82. And I was like, wow, guys.
It's a shame. I would say yours and WebPT, like they're very like wide in terms of profession.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say those were the two that didn't exist. And when they did, it was like, blood to a shark because all we had was the comment section.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just one person's opinion, and maybe they'd give some hard numbers, but probably not. So yours was the first one where people could actually say, and you would put the end on how many pieces of data you were drawing that conclusion from.
It's right there. I mean, there's over the years that we run it, I think there's been 3 people that have caught any kind of error or had kind of protest. And I think only one of them was truly like a mathematical error. And so people have checked our work. I welcome it. Like usually at the very bottom, I'm like, here's like the last like 8 years of raw data.
Right.
Have at it, guys. Like, and now with like, with generative AI, I'm sure somebody's like going in there now going like, hey, is this, did Ben do his math right? And that's cool. I mean, that's what this whole thing was about. The mission of the Pulse really was so that you could have a pulse on the job market, in the macro, in the micro, in the meta, and in a way where you could use it for yourself, whether you're an applicant or a hiring manager, or just like FYI for career choices down the line. And it was always about wage transparency. And more importantly, in my opinion, was wage literacy.
Yeah, being able to understand it. Mm-hmm. Well, something different. You talked about how long you're at an organization. That might be a factor. Let's talk about versatility. You're a big advocate for the idea that your DPT can take you anywhere. I'm a podcaster, for Christmas sake. Like, what do clinicians need to hear right now in 2025 about stepping outside of that traditional clinical path that a lot of people are showing interest in?
Oh, yeah. Huge. And it's honestly, and this is where I feel like it goes back to the early part of today's episode is, we've evolved with great difficulty. It's the same message I gave, I think, in like 2016, 17, which is the whole world is open to you. Yeah. It really, really is. I know that there's still a stigma. It's less so. I think when I was growing up in the profession, excuse me, there's this idea that you were like a traitor to the profession if you weren't hands-on patients or in the clinic walls or in the facility. Now less so, right? I mean, there's telehealth, there's a lot of different things. But if you take a look at a lot of other professions, and I would advise you take a look at like pharmacists and nurses. They cover a lot more range, and there's also regions for that because of kind of how upstream they are in the healthcare lattice work. But at the same time, it doesn't have to be the case. Like I was an engineer before. There's a lot of people I've met, especially at private practice events, where it's like their fourth career, they were like farmers and restaurateurs and real estate agents. And they're like, no, I need to do this. This is my calling. And so what I think everyone needs to hear, if you're looking to step out of that, whether it's out of burnout or out of interest of like just looking at something different, is that the world truly is open to you. However, it's a numbers game. I think that's what's really difficult for PTs and PTAs to understand is we are part of such a high performing, like what's the best word for this? Like self-critical profession, like we're perfectionists. Most of us are very type A professionally, but very type B corporately. And, we're very down on ourselves more so than I think anybody else ever will be. And we have this massive imposter syndrome. And none of that is bad per se. It's just kind of the makeup of what draws folks to the profession, I feel. But it is a numbers game. So if you're looking to get into corporate management or into marketing or into media or into research or into tech or into anything else, you're going to have to apply yourself, whether it's through actual job applications or just the attempts that you're trying. I'm just going to throw out a number, like 10 times more than the average bear. Right. And so it's going to require you to have thick enough skin to apply to like 100 different jobs and receive word from only one or two of them, because there really is a numbers game. Somebody like a human eye needs to take a look at you, whether it's on the application, the AI application portal, the PDF that you're printed out or emailed or cold called with, and go, you know what? Like I'll take a look at this, right? Says the hiring manager, and go, wonder why a PT wants to apply for this job. That's weird. Like I'm in my third coffee in, I could mentally withstand this. Let's give this person a call, right? Like that's going to be the case. And it can be emotionally damaging to, throw out like 1,000 applications and receive nothing back, right? It's just like, gee, like really no one wants me at all, like after all this. Right. But it's not that no one wants you. It's that you just have to play enough of a numbers game to get noticed. And I think that's the reality of it. It shouldn't be that way, but also kind of earlier in the podcast as mentioned, we have to play within the reality that we find ourselves in order to get the next step up, in order to change that reality for ourselves and others.
All right, real talk for a second. If you're a physical therapist or running a clinic, you already wear like 50 hats a day. Clinician, manager, scheduler, part-time tech support. I see you. But what if you had a sidekick that could help you do all of that? Something smarter. That's where Empower EMR by MW Therapy comes in. It's built just for physical therapists. And it's loaded with smart automations and AI that help you grow your practice without burning out. No more chasing paper trails or fighting outdated systems. This thing handles billing, scheduling, documentation, patient engagement, all in one clean, customizable platform. The best part? It's actually affordable and scales as you grow. Clinics everywhere are loving it. And if you're ready to take the stress off your plate and be the hero of your practice again, check out a free demo at mwtherapy.com. Yeah, agreed. Let's take a different route. You've worked at high levels in business and leadership. You've been in boardrooms that maybe not everybody has been or will be in, and that's okay. What can you steal from the boardroom and give to someone right now? What's a lesson from a boardroom that every new grad should hear before starting their career?
That's such a great, again, compliments to you. And I'm going to push back on something you said earlier today, Jimmy, is that I disagree with the fact that I think you did do something special. I think you had the professional background for this, but I also feel like you have a naturally curious mind. That's something that I feel like we always connected on forever. It's something I really appreciated when I got to know you at first when you're still a student, is that you thought beyond that kind of student acquisition mind into like, how do I dig deeper into like the nature of this profession? So kudos to you. That said, the boardroom, no one ever really thinks about the boardroom. I don't think. I think people think they know it exists, right? But they don't understand what a board of director does, whether it's a board of directors, if it's executive advisor board, or if it's like a managing director board. Like it's a deeper piece of the American organizational corporate culture, big or small, that just exists, right? And so I think it's important to define like what piece is, and then we can glean from the lessons of it. So for most boards, whether a board of directors, trustees, what have you, there's a group of individuals either voted in or appointed in, depending on the corporate structure, to essentially oversee and govern the CEO and the rest of the C-suite. That's their job. Often it's a mixture of folks that have direct stake interest in it, whether it's through equity, finances, or their stakeholders, like they'll be influenced by that particular corporation or entity or organization. And often they try to get folks that are, quote, lay people that don't know anything about the inner workings of the profession, because they bring a third eye lens that, if you're too close to something, you just can't see. So the board of any kind of organization, typically their job is to make sure that the C-suite's doing their job, and that they can prescribe grand stakes, like 180-degree arc visions of like, hey, let's go over there or let's go over here. And then the C-suite can choose how they want to get there. And so what happens in the boardroom is really fascinating, because it's a grade A lesson on intra-organizational politics. And I think the first thing, I'll share a couple. First thing I think that most people need to hear is that board members typically are in service because they really do care. And it's not about the money for them, because most of them are either volunteers or they get like a basic stipend. And then the stipend has to be wiggled depending on how much liability they want to take on. So as an example, I'm actually the president of a school board. And so I take like a driving stipend, so I don't have like any kind of weird liability on top of me after that. And so even in that board, right, every single board member deeply cares about the success of the school, the students, the parents, the guardians, and so forth, the teachers especially. We care a lot about the teachers. And that's the same thing as most of these corporate boardrooms, is none of the board members are there like, Monty Burns from Simpsons going, hey, how can I steal from the little man? That doesn't happen. They're typically very, I've had board members come in with like, sorry, I can, I feel like I can say this. This is years ago. It's past like the thing, but it's like, they're like, I don't care about how the executives get paid. I care about how the teachers get paid, right? How the line staff get paid. And that's very common thread in these executive boardrooms. I think the second thing really is that there's not always enough power there for them to influence changes downstream, right? They can choose the C-suite and to a certain degree, like call it like the executive VPs or the VPs. But between the VP line and like the line managers, that's all up to the organization. And I think that's where a lot of frustration occurs, is that they're like, we have this great CEO, like we love them, but like, how come our GM at this, or this regional manager at this area sucks so bad, And it's like, can't the board do something? Well, the answer actually is no, it's outside of their jurisdiction. Otherwise they're an overreaching board that creates a lot of different conflict and so forth. So I think, to all to say that board members at a lot of these organizations, large and small, they really do care about the organization. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there. It's a lot of stress. It's a lot of time management. They're reading things and dealing with decisions that no one should ever have to deal with, honestly.
Right.
And so they really do care. They wouldn't be there otherwise. They don't get paid enough for that problem. The CEO, CFO, they probably are paid enough for that problem, but the board members aren't. But they only influence so much. And so this is the piece I think everyone needs to hear is if you do have a concern, reach out to your board. Most boards are compliant under certain public access information laws. So they can't just directly connect with you, but you can connect with them. So most of them have a hotline. Like my school board has a hotline. Every other corporate or executive advisory board I've served in has a hotline. And every board that I have or just executive room that I've consulted for, they have a hotline. It's all inbound. They can't say anything outward just because there's a lot of regulations there, but reach out to them with your concerns. You don't have to flame anybody, but if you do have concerns, bring it up because then they can change it at a procedural and policy level.
Yeah, it's a smart piece of advice. All right, last thing I'll ask before we get into a speed round.
Awesome.
How has your definition of success changed since 2014? We alluded to it not long ago, right? First it was like, I can't wait to come back and triumphant return and show how I've changed.
Yeah.
But the second part of that question be after your definition of success has changed in the last 10 years, what do you hope younger PTs that maybe are listening to this right now focus on more than just title or salary?
Yeah. I think the best way to describe this is just to describe what my current definition of success is and then go back. So my current definition of success is time. So time, and I think I started saying this around 2019, time is the one commodity you don't get back. Right. And time is a vehicle for value. It almost exists outside of the tangible in that sense, if we're going like hyper philosophical. But the more I can maximize my time, the more successful I feel that I am. And that's across all boundaries. I believe strongly that like the human experience is split into like 4 macros, if you will. There's the physical, the intellectual, the emotional, and the spiritual, for lack of better terms. And I feel like the more you can maximize your time investments in these 4 circles and how they overlap, the more successful you feel like you are in life. And so some of the physical is financial. It's going to be. We have to. It's just part of life. But there's other things, and like 10 years ago, my kid was a little baby. And there's that kind of things. And now he's in middle school. And so I have different understanding of how that time investment and time wealth, if you will, is. And so for some people, that might mean, okay, I need to like really figure out a way to create passive income. For others, they're like, okay, I just need to make sure that my day-to-day doesn't burn me down and I can spend good time with myself and my family at home, or go on travels or whatever. So like to me, success right now is A, time, and B, impact. So how much time can I invest in myself and meaningfully in others? And what does that downstream impact look like? And so again, for myself, my son the other day just really impressed me with his emotional intelligence. And I was just like, wow, kid, you're a kind kid, and that's special. And that made, like, as a dad, I was like, that was a win, that was cool. And that was success. Now, 10 years ago, I was indignant. I was, again, a lot less calm, a little bit more brash, really wanted things to change overnight, didn't care who I offended, kind of still don't care who I offend. I just don't try to do it anymore.
Yeah.
And back then, success to me was radical change yesterday, and it was change according to Ben Fung. And I think that's a very myopic view, where the world is so much bigger than my own mind, and I didn't have the humility or the maturity to see at the time, right? Like I got kind of launched into this journey because I was like, man. Whether for reasons or other reasons, I hit these glass ceilings, and like everyone wants me in leadership positions except for my bosses and like a couple of grumpy senior therapists. Screw them, right? That kind of thought process was always there, and so success was coming back and going, I was right the whole time, you were wrong the whole time, and so forth. And so it's very black and white back then. It was very emotionally driven. Now it's a little bit more, a little more transcendent, and I think what young professionals need to hear, whether you're pre-grad or a new grad, really is to take a step back and take a look at what your next 5, 10, maybe 15 years of life needs to be for you to take a look at that. And it's going to change, right? Like every couple of years, your kind of life lens will change, and that's okay. That's just part of being human. But if 10 years from where you are right now and you're a new grad and I'm just gonna make it, but you say you're in your mid 20s, early 30s, and you're going, okay, I'm going to hit, 40. What do I need 40 to look like for me to feel like I didn't waste my life? Right.
Yeah.
Because what you really typically hear from most people at the end of their lives, and I used to work with a lot of geriatrics, regrets aren't based on what you did. They're based on what you didn't do or didn't try to at least do. So what do you need to attempt now, right, to look back in 10 years in your 40s and go, hey, at least I tried that. Right.
Yeah.
Or I had those experiences. I had those adventures. I had those life tiles if you're into the game of life.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah. Regret the things you do, not the things you don't do, is a great piece of advice I heard too. All right, Ben, it's time for game time. All right, game time. We're gonna jump in the PT time machine.
All right.
I'm gonna throw out a series. I'm gonna throw out 5 topics.
Okay.
And I'll sort of frame what I thought it looked like in 2015.
Okay.
And then I want your now interpretation on that, right?
All right.
So
This is gonna be good.
In 2015, social media for PTs, I felt like was the Wild West. Like,
Oh man.
we were just yelling sort of in the void, a lot of yelling at each other instead of talking to each other. I feel like there is still some of that element. There's always going to be, but I feel like we've started to get better at using it as a tool, as a platform to learn and change better than we did in 2015.
Absolutely. Man, I think where it is now is interesting because I feel like the conversations have centralized based on emotional valence, for lack of better terms. So to just, full disclosure, I am older than I look, and I am just not on TikTok. That said, throughout the wave since 2015, it really was like everywhere there was like every possible emotion, every possible topic on every possible channel. Now I feel like you got a lot more like professional, like actual professional engagement in something like LinkedIn, which was supposed to be that. Like 8 years ago, they're like, yeah, LinkedIn's gonna be the next big thing. It just wasn't until probably like the last 2 years. I feel like, X/Twitter now is a kind of small circle of discussions, really, and a little bit of yelling because that's just the platform. What's really interesting to me is that Instagram is really a place of like-mindedness. I feel there's a couple of comment sections that are going to be a little bit atrocious just because that's just how it is, right? Anytime you open the comment section. But I feel like you find that like minds will gravitate to like minds in the space of Instagram. Facebook, ironically enough, is that much more personal. Most people don't engage on Facebook unless you actually know each other, which was really interesting to me because that just wasn't the case back in the day. And then the groups have also really taken off, right? Like there's the 2 big groups I'm aware of is actually now 3. There's a general physical therapy group that's like open to the all public. There's the DPT student group, and there's like the PT education networking, group. And, those groups have ballooned up. But even some of what's interesting to me is that a lot of the conversations have kind of pulled back from those groups, and they've really come to be a little bit more like full circle in terms of your natural small group inclinations. And so I think it's a little less Wild West. I feel like, for lack of better terms, I feel we're kind of breakfast clubby right now.
There we go.
I think we're kind of in the breakfast club era of social media and PT.
Love it. All right. Marketing yourself. In 2015, when we started the show, I feel like people like yourself, myself, we needed to explain like, no, you controlling your own message is necessary. And like, there are right and wrong ways to do it. And I feel like the tide has turned where more people are at least accepting of like, I need to do a better job of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think back then, Twitter was your only real place. And I actually can't tell you how many new grads actually got jobs from Twitter. Just being on Twitter, chatting when there was CSM or back then APTA Next or PPS. That's how students got jobs. It was crazy. Like I think in the 2015 through 17 era, the amount of people that we was able to leverage that was incredible. Now it's very much back in LinkedIn, and also like hyping your resume to be able to get through some AI filters that HR portals typically use. But I think people do understand it now. I think A lot more people are using LinkedIn because it's become that place for it. Frustrating as it is, which might be just off topic piece, but I do feel that people understand it. A lot of people are more aware. A lot more. I've noticed a lot more professionals have private Instagram handles now, just to be able to create a little bit of dichotomy between their personal persona and their professional persona. And yeah, you do need to control that message for yourself, or you have to be able to explain it. Depending on your work history, because there's some of that contention there depending on where you are. Like you worked for company A. Wow, that was weird. Why did you work for them? I were you there for 7 years? Blah, blah, blah. Right. And you have to be able to explain some of those things on a human to human element. So I definitely think the tide has turned. People are aware, and more people have come into the profession. I think is a tech generation thing, just kind of naturally appreciating that is part of their professional reality, is managing their online footprint.
All right, last one we'll do for the time machine. I feel like 10 years ago, work-life balance was not a phrase that we knew. And I feel like that's something that's got a lot of light shed on it now in 2025.
For sure. Back then, actually, there was even going back to the whole, entrepreneurial grind set. There was no balance, right? The idea was like, if you were a hardcore entrepreneur by mind and by creed, by title, by life, there was no balance. You were always on. I don't know that was the healthiest way of going about it. Now work-life balance is everything and everywhere. We're running this info for the Pulse, and it's one of the top 2 non-salary based factors of how candidates will judge if they want to apply or accept the position. It's just from the feel of walking through the clinic or the facility and going, yeah, I could see myself being okay here, versus, yeah, they're going to run me into the ground here. And I think that managers are very aware of it. I think, the corporate leaders are also very aware of it. I think that what it really is that we have a coming generation where my conversation, she's my muse, my wife. And I was talking about this because I was asking her, what should the central message of the Pulse be for year 10? Right. And it came back to one of the bullet points, if you will, was that there is no work-life balance if you don't have a life to go back to.
Oof.
Right. And I think that is what changed, is that 10 years ago, I think we were just in such a scramble professionally. And now, after kind of having the world turned upside down and shaken inside out, we kind of take a look at things and go, it doesn't always have to be that way. There's a lot of different options that we can take. And so I do have a life I want to go back to. You heard me talk about it. I have time I want to get back, or time I want to feed forward. And if I have that, then I do need work-life balance, because work isn't my only life piece anymore. And so I think that that's a big piece and takeaway for, if you're listening to this and you're on the line staff or line management line and, sector of our profession, and you're going, I feel a little bit burnt out, or I feel a little bit antsy about where I am, and versus, middle managers and above, if you're a little worried about this, is just ask yourself a simple question: is the work following your people home? Right. That's probably the number one question of if work-life balance is being breached, is, does the stress follow your people home? And if it does, you have some major reworking and thinking to do.
Yeah. Well said. All right, Ben, of course, the last thing we do on the episode is called the parting shot. So that's your chance to be prolific or mic drop moment. You can repeat something that's been said before, but what would be the idea or sentiment you'd want to leave with the audience as we wrap this one up? 10 years in the making.
10 years in the making. I think the mic drop moment goes back to one of the macro points that I only this weekend kind of shed light in my own mind about, in terms of the Pulse and what has happened in the last 10 years. And it really has to do with where the progression of the profession has come and gone. And I take a look at it, and it hurts me to say it. And I don't feel like we have grown up that much. I feel like we have grown wide. And that's okay. You need that to grow. You have to have a wide root bred to be able to grow a strong, tall tree. But that said, we still need to grow vertically. I think the takeaway is this: that often in our profession, we are too short-sighted or short-term focused, despite us wanting to be long-term focused. And I think the big mic drop moment I keep seeing is, whether it's in human resource management or in billing and revenue or in advocacy even, is we tend to fight these battles quarter by quarter and year by year. And we really need to start thinking about fighting these battles decade by decade, because I'm truly concerned about where our profession is should we still do this 10 years from now, like 20 years later, right? Like 20-year reunion I'm terrified for our profession that if we don't have a 10-year battle plan going forward, that, we're going to feel like we're more in shambles than we are now, because we need to fight for everything that has to do with the economic health, for lack of better terms, of our profession. And I think that as a profession, we're not taught that. We're not taught that in school. We're not taught to care about it in school. And we're typically not taught to care about it as a new grad. And those are formative years for our professional identity, personally and in the large scale of our profession. And so I think, the mic drop moment is my encouragement to you, you listeners here at PT Pintcast, is make sure you have a personal and a professional battle plan for the next 10 years and a channel that you're willing to dedicate yourself to on how to make that happen. So if you want PTs to be paid more, you need to fight for things that advocate specifically for revenue line and reimbursement change, right? If you have a passion for PTs to be able to break out of the clinical mold, then you need to fight in that battleground of how do I make more opportunities for myself and for our profession, maybe all of rehab therapy, to be able to break out of the clinical mold and into all these other pie sectors that we could exist in, and if something else is, kind of tugging on your heart to do so, form that 10-year battle plan. Because I think that all too often we only think in like, okay, how can we just make it through this next year and make it through this next year? Because there is no next year unless we make it through this year, which is true. But there is no long-term future if we don't think decades ahead.
Well said. Ben Fung, thanks for doing it 10 years ago. And thanks for coming back to do it now, man. Much appreciated.
Absolute privilege, pleasure, and honor. I'm so glad that you're doing this. And, when you reached out first, I was just like, dang, it has been 10 years.
And where can people find the pulse if someone's listening going, hey, give me that. How do I get that?
So you can go to updocmedia.com. That's just updocmedia.com. You can search the little magnifying glass thing. Every year we have a direct URL. So it'll be updocmedia.com/pulse-the year. So if you want to take a look at last year's, we're recording this in early, spring of 25. You just go to pulse-2024. I'll release a Pulse-2025 soon. So maybe by the time this episode is released, you can just go there, updocmedia.com/Pulse-2025. But you'll see it all over the place. If you just Google job market pulse, it'll pop up.
Perfect. Ben Fung, thanks again for the time and the insight.
You bet. Anytime.
Let's be real. You didn't become a therapist to be average. You've got something in you that wants more mastery, more impact, more confidence in the clinic. That's exactly what Brooks Institute of Higher Learning delivers. Their residency and fellowship programs aren't just resume builders, they're transformation zones. You get one-on-one mentoring, deep dive classwork, labs, and real-time experience inside one of the most advanced rehab systems in the country. And the best part? You're not grinding this out on the side. You get a full salary and benefits while you train with the best. Whether it's ortho, neuro, peds, geriatrics, women's health, Brooks IHL helps you become the expert you know you're meant to be. Check out brooksihl.org to learn more and take that next step.